Hello and welcome to my next video. Today I'll be talking about a new discovery in the process of aging. It's sort of a common phenomenon that once people get to around the age of 70, they start to suddenly become a lot more frail and their health starts to decline. And some researchers may have found the actual cause of this by studying the genomes of many people over different ages. And they have found that the genetic diversity of cells decreases exponentially as you get older, up to the age of around 70 to 75. They believe that one cause of this is sort of an increase of mutations that gather up as you get older and really start to take effect once you get to a certain age. And I'll sort of go through, the reasons that these mutations build up and the reason that they take so long to actually cause issues, and sort of just a little bit about, why mutations would cause issues. So part of what has prompted this study is a surprising statistic that you can see on this graph here, where they're plotting the density of the number of people that are dying at a certain age, increasing from very young to extremely old. And you can see that there's actually a very significant spike once you get to around 80 to 85. Normally you would expect there to be sort of a more even distribution between the ages of 60 to 90 when people start to die, but it's actually a very, very steep increase. And while the study doesn't necessarily, prove one way or the other what is causing this, it starts to give us a little bit more insight into sort of the mechanics behind this aging process and why it seems to happen so much faster than you might expect. So getting into some of the results of this study, you can see a few graphs here where for the first two graphs they're plotting sort of the number of mutations that they found in people's cells versus the age of the participant that they're measuring. It ranges from some newborn babies at 0 all the way up to people in their 80s. And you can see in the first two plots, a linear increase of, the first plot is a single nucleotide variants, second plot is insertions or deletions, sort of abbreviated as indels. And you can see they also have a line showing the trajectory of this, and that it really does tend to follow a pretty linear path. And since it's linear, you might expect, the number of deaths as you go up to increase linearly, but as we've shown, it actually goes up exponentially. So part of this study is explaining why this actually happens and why it goes up exponentially when it's being caused by something that actually goes up linearly. And it really has to do with the diversity of cells. You see in this bottom right graph, the diversity of the cells, instead of going down linearly, goes down exponentially. And as you get to the age of 60 or so, really starts to drop off. And later I'll talk about this diversity, what it's actually talking about when they say diversity, and sort of the issues that it would cause. But before I talk too much more about the study, I want to sort of go over the process by which cells replicate, because that's pretty important for understanding sort of why these mutations cause issues in the actual person's health. So you're probably familiar with this diagram of one cell turning into 2, growing, and then turning into 4. But one of the underlying parts of this is that the genes are also being sort of copied and replicated between cells. So of course the genes code for basically everything in the cell. Without genes, the cell wouldn't know what to do. But the issue comes when cells start to have mutations. And because a cell is copying its DNA to 2 offspring, any mutation in the cell will also get passed on to those 2 more cells. And in this case, they also have the issue that these mutations cause the cells to grow more effectively while also functioning less effectively, which sort of maybe reminds you of the idea of cancer, where a single cell will sort of replicate really, really fast and cause a tumor. This is sort of a less extreme version of that process, but also has pretty bad health effects since you get many, many cells that have mutations, and they sort of dominate over the cells that have fewer mutations and are functioning better, but sort of don't replicate as effectively. And one of the insights of this study is that these mutations aren't only occurring when you're old. It's actually sort of a process, as I mentioned before, that linearly increases, and that over time, more and more of these mutated cells are starting to build up, but they don't really get a foothold until you get older, when they start to be the main cells that are getting produced, not necessarily taking up all the space, but much more than we would have expected. And then they really start to cause you to get sick and frail. So here we have some diagrams that show essentially a family tree of cells throughout all the cells that they measured in individual subjects. The first person here is 29, then 38, then 63. And it sort of shows over time, whether or not there's more cells that are getting mutated, or more cells that are sort of, taking over and replicating more than they should. And what you're really looking for in these graphs is these colored lines, which indicate different types of mutations or errors, as well as sort of gaps in these family trees. There's, the first few don't really have any gaps, but the last one has a small gap with a blue line, which indicates sort of a single cell or a few cells that are really starting to replicate a lot more than the other ones. And if this cell were to have any mutations, it would then spread these mutations to many more cells than, a normal cell that was mutated, only spreading to a few other ones. So then moving on to some graphs of people that are above 75, you see that they have a lot more color to the graphs. And in this first one, somebody that's 76 years old, there's not too many mutations, but there's a lot of this blue, which indicates a lot of cells that are really, taking up a lot of real estate and significantly decreasing the diversity of the person's genome. So, this doesn't have too many mutations, but you see in other graphs, any mutation that does occur can get spread to many, many cells much more effectively due to this decreased diversity and these, big gaps that you start to see in the graphs. You see this last graph with the person's 81 years old, has almost half of the graph filled up by a few cells that are really dominating, and any mutations that they have are getting spread to many, many cells. And the main takeaway of this is that these mutations that are building up over time, they slowly and slowly start to get a foothold and take over more of the cells, and in multiple systems throughout your body, this starts to cause you to go into worse health and in some cases suddenly become much more frail in your 70s. And while this probably all sounds pretty bad, talking about all the horrible things that happen as you get older, the actual result of this study is quite good, because this obviously is something that's been happening throughout history. It's just something we weren't really aware of. And the study has really shed some light on one of the causes behind aging, and in the process of trying to let people live longer and healthier, discoveries like this will really help our understanding and allow us to really combat more concrete issues. Before this, we didn't really have a great reason for why people got frail when they were 70 or older. But along with this and future studies, we can start to, improve people's lives as they get older, instead of just making them live longer with worse health. We can actually, make people young when they're 70 by improving their cell diversity or, similar things like that. So I'm interested to see what they discover next in this field and see if they can make some technology to directly help people. But anyway, hopefully you found this interesting. I'll link this study as always in the description, and so if you enjoyed, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.